Hello, I'm LaTonya Turner. As you can see, a lot of us could be facing a retirement savings shortfall, even those who have taken steps to manage and prepare financially. What are the choices and behaviors that can result in the financial security we want as we age? And how do we distinguish between assumption and reality in getting there? Let's talk about that with some professionals who deal with aging matters related to economics. Joining me are Maribeth Farringer, Executive Director of the Council on Aging of Greater Nashville; Barbara Moss, an attorney with Elder Law of Nashville; and Catherine K. Quinn, a certified financial planner with Quinn Financial Partners, who you saw a few minutes ago in the documentary. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
You know, one of the things it seems to me is that there's sort of a disconnect in what resources people actually wind up needing once they stop earning money through work and what they actually have. And it's not that anybody necessarily does anything wrong, but things have changed. So let's talk a little bit about where you think the disconnect is between what's needed and what people actually have. Why don't we start with you, Maribeth?
Okay. Well, first of all, people are living longer, and it's hard to know how long you're going to live. I often think that if we all had a crystal ball, that would be the biggest help in our retirement planning. We would know, are we going to live to be 90 and in good health? Are we going to live to be 65 and die immediately? Are we going to be caring for someone who has a long-term illness for quite a while, such as Alzheimer's? So all of those things impact our social life and our economic life as we retire, and we just don't know which of those scenarios is going to happen.
You know, some people are sports fans, and I like to use the analogy that the playing field has changed, but we're still using the same game plan.
That's true.
And a strategy in a lot of cases. What about you, Barbara? Where do you see the disconnect between what people need and what they actually wind up having?
There's a real misconception about what Medicare will pay for. 65% of the people who describe themselves as very familiar with Medicare believe that Medicare will pay for a nursing home, and that's not really true. If you're actually admitted to a hospital for 3 days and go into a skilled nursing facility, Medicare will pay for 20 days. Then it might pay a portion of 80 more days, but at day 101, Medicare won't pay a penny toward a nursing home. And people don't really realize that, and they don't then save for what the eventuality that might present.
You know, that is something that I've heard and actually observed, you know, in doing this report. And I wonder why it continues to be that way. And it occurred to me, maybe people get confused over the similarity of terms with Medicare and Medicaid being so similar. Do you think that's why people continue to miss?
It's a shame they named both of those words with an M.
Yes.
Because, you know, of course, Medicaid here in Tennessee is called TennCare. But still, there is such a misconception, and it's all part of, we don't really look very hard at this whole subject, which is why this series of documentaries is such a good idea.
Good, good. Glad that we're able to do this. Kay, let's talk a little bit about where you see the disconnect.
I agree that we're not looking at how long we're going to be living, and that as the life expectancy has extended, people are scared. People don't really want to go there. They know that they may just have Social Security benefits and very little lump sum in retirement. And so instead of addressing it early, which is the best idea, they postpone out of fear and talking with their family, their younger family members, the reality of what is happening. But they are just avoiding many times the inevitable, and that is that we're living longer. We'd like to enjoy those years of longer living and make good decisions now to do that.
You know, it's sort of a new phenomena, though, right? I mean, it's not so much that people are completely avoiding it as I think it's kind of catching some people by surprise, don't you think?
I think the model has changed too. If we think back to our parents or grandparents, they worked and they knew they were only going to work probably to 65, but they retired with a pension. how many people now will be retiring with a pension?
A company-sponsored
Exactly.
invested plan.
Exactly. So right there, the model has changed, and if people are trying to plan like their parents did, it's not going to work. They really need to look in a more broad way at what they will have, what they will need. And I think kind of along the lines of something Barbara said, I think people underestimate how much their medical costs will be. I've seen some statistics that say the average retiree spends $250,000 out of pocket for medical care once they've retired. And I don't think they think that. They think that Medicare is going to pay everything. And there's co-pays, there's deductibles, there are the things like hearing aids that they don't cover. So I think that's another big misconception that plays into the unexpected cost.
So much of what we're talking about that's become challenging is because people are now more accountable or responsible for their own planning. So you talked about company-sponsored plans. Well, now the 401k and 403bs are much more common, which are individually managed and controlled. And so how much of this is because people are not as savvy, perhaps, as they should be, and maybe aren't reaping the benefit of 401k plans like they once did for company-sponsored pension plans because they just are not as skilled at making those choices.
We see some clients that aren't taking advantage of matches at their employer-sponsored plan. Most employees are. Many people that could find employment where they have retirement plans with employer-paid benefits. That may not be on their radar screen when they're younger. It's definitely on their radar screen as they age, but they're playing catch-up. The crux of it is that we haven't really looked at how many years we're going to have to fund our living without income. And we live as if we're going to work for forever, and circumstances happen, health changes, and we may be unable to have earned income, and then what? So if we can just get mindful about being honest about how we're going to fund our longevity in the event we don't have earned income. And
Do you have you changed how you approach that with clients over the years to a different type of advice in terms of planning for that? Has it changed in your
I think it
profession?
has changed. I mean, we show them year by year, assuming they live to age 90 or longer, which is becoming more the norm than the exception, on, okay, here you stop working at 65 or 70, okay, so no more earned income coming in, and now here's your lump sum, here's Social Security. What are your living expenses and how are we going to meet those expenses? So let's go ahead and look at it now while we can do something about it. And then you bring in another aberrant like a long-term care need, and that will just be very hard for clients to see, hey, I really can't deal with that. I'm having a hard enough time dealing with funding my longevity. And so we just have to prioritize what they address.
There also seemed or it seemed to me in the past, there was also more interest and emphasis on preserving assets for another generation. It seems like that's not really even, or maybe shouldn't be a priority anymore. It might be something you can do if you have those enough resources, but should that move down the list?
Well,
Barbara?
in our day and age, the 40 acres is now the education that you give your children. So I think it should be less of a priority. Your children, if you live to be 90, will be 60. So they need to, that what you give them is long before they would have an inheritance. And I want to speak to something you said, which is that people aren't savvy about investments. In a way, we're asking them to have skills that they never had to have before.
That's a good point.
So, of course they're not savvy. And one final point is, actually, the whole idea of retirement is something that came along in the 30s. You know, we, at the time that FDR came up with this idea and retire at 65, the average life expectancy was about 65 or 66. It's actually statistically bad for you to retire early or even at 65. You might live longer statistically if you kept working. So we haven't adjusted a lot of the ideas that we need to adjust to go along with that longer life expectancy, that greater skills in financial management.
I think when people understand the history, like you've just explained it, that, you know, these concepts came out of such a different era. And I think Social Security is 50 years old this year. Is that correct? Or around 50 years old? So as you were saying, it was very different at that time in terms of life expectancy, the type of labor force. Was very different.
The type of work we performed.
The type of work. And one of the things we heard repeatedly from most people in the documentary was to continue to work as long as you can and to delay drawing Social Security. And I want to talk about that a little bit because there are societal ideas and norms around that, and even ageism, to be frank. So what strategies and what are your thoughts about that, and is society ready? Is the corporate world ready to embrace older workers who say, yeah, that's a good idea, I'm gonna keep working until I'm 70? Barbara, is that illegal?
Well, no, there is an Age Discrimination and Employment Act that will protect older workers, and there's no upper limit to it.
Okay.
Are corporations ready? They may have to be ready because there may not be enough younger workers to fill some of those crucial jobs. So I see this is a great time for older adults to not only consider to keep working, but to consider, I love these words, encore career.
Oh, I like that term too. Hadn't heard it before.
Right,
Okay.
an encore career. Maybe
Like, what do
running
I want to do next? Kind of.
nonprofit, maybe running a nonprofit.
Very good. And I'm sure you have resources that help people with that in the directory, correct, Maribeth?
Correct. Our Directory of Services has a whole chapter on employment.
Okay.
And there's a couple of ways to look at it. As Barbara indicated, encore careers. Maybe you did one thing for 30 years, but you always wanted to do, now's your chance.
Yes.
I think another thing is that many people, not many, but a fair number of people use retiring from their initial job as a way maybe to open their own business. You know, they may not need the amount of income that they had for most of their lives, but they do need something to supplement what they're getting from a retirement plan or from Social Security. So a small business can satisfy that. An additional benefit is that many people who stay active, whether it's as a volunteer or in the workforce, their health and their quality of life improves, so they're spending less on medical issues. So that's another issue. I think another point, though, is that we have to realize is that with the recent recession, it hit seniors very hard. A lot of seniors lost their jobs, and it took them much, much longer to find another job, and many just gave up. Okay. So even some people who maybe wanted to stay in the workforce found it very difficult to get back in.
It seems, though, it might be easier to rethink how to do that now with so much dependent on digital resources and less so on physical labor, that if you are looking for an encore career, it becomes a little easier if you're older. Would you agree with that?
I do, and in fact, there's some government programs that can help older workers. There's Title V money that specifically trains people 55 and older and helps place them in new jobs. Now, it's for low-income people, but it's you don't have to be destitute to qualify, but it might give them the computer skills that they need to go to another job. Or one great example is, who better to help care for frail older people than people close to their age? They know what's needed to be a caregiver. And so there's specific programs to help them become licensed caregivers.
Okay. How do people, what are the things that people need to be aware of financially in getting ready to either have an encore career or leave the workplace or the workforce? One of the things that we have, not talked about is that something I heard quite a bit from people. Got to get out of debt. That's before I retire, I'm going to pay down my debt, and even instead of saving. Is that a good strategy to forego saving, pay off your debt?
Well, just for mathematically, if you're paying high interest rate debt and you're also saving, mathematically you're hurting
Canceling
yourself.
it out,
Yeah.
kind of. Okay.
I think basically just get honest with a plan to get out of debt. If you're going to retire credit card debt or other consumer debt, but you don't have a plan to meet the expense of a new heating unit or roof or a mandatory expense that you're going to have to incur, then you're going to get back into debt on another level soon. So let's just go ahead and sit down, look at our expenses, look at our debt, and maybe put some away for savings and some away toward that debt with a goal of ridding the debt, over a certain period of time, while saving for emergencies. Because emergencies are emergencies, but they're really just deferred expenses like a water heater. I mean, it's inevitably going to come. So instead of having to charge it and pay 15-20% debt on that expense, let's go ahead and begin setting aside monies for that now. And again, just being frank with yourself on how do I really want to enjoy my retirement? Can I take some steps now to get myself better positioned, knowing that I'm not going to work forever. I may not be in this job that's paying X amount. I may have to move to another position that pays less than this. But what can I do now to really enjoy my longevity, meet my expenses, and be very honest along the way with my spending and what I have and what I can and can't do.
One of the things I like about what you're saying is you're not sort of setting thresholds and ceilings like, oh, if you've reached this age, it's just too late.
Right.
You can always do something, right? I mean,
when people come, just coming and being honest about it is huge. I mean, you're ready to say, okay, I really want to enjoy if I go out to eat. If it's Wendy's, that's great. If I can afford it, if it's a nicer restaurant and I don't know if I can afford it or not, it's really not that fun to spend money you're not sure if you have or not, or that you put on a card that you're going to pay off over 5 years. So, I think just really having a very transparent, honest conversation with yourself is a huge first step.
and your family or
Right.
partner or spouse if there are other people impacted. Maribeth, you and I have talked a little bit about this, and at some point it does become more of a challenge to say, okay, how do I make this happen? And I want you to explain to our viewers your concept of retirement part 2.
Yeah, and we actually had one of our board members kind of come up with this concept, but I think a lot of people, when they think retirement, they think of how things are when they're 65 or 70, when they're in good health, when their spouse is in good health, and frankly, they retire with as much money as they're ever going to have. But then maybe around the time you reach 80, 82, somewhere along that, you're kind of in a second phase. Perhaps your spouse has died, or perhaps you or your spouse has some long-term disease. You've spent some of that stack of money that you have, and you're starting to wonder, how long can I stay in my house? How long before I need help? And so the questions and the concerns are different than when you are 65. And you don't know what those are going to be. You almost have to experience some of it before you're ready to maybe do that retirement part 2. But it's just as important that you plan for that as for your initial retirement. It kind of gets back to the crystal ball.
Right.
If we had a crystal ball and knew what condition we were going to be in when we were 85, it would help, but we don't have that.
Is there a different strategy at that stage or for that stage, Barbara, when it comes to the clients you work with? I mean, is that where you really want to make sure your documents are, allow for people to intercede on your behalf, or what are your thoughts about retirement part two? And
Well,
what's
there
needed?
is really a point at which you need to see a lawyer, when you get a divorce, for example. But all of us need to have a power of attorney for health care. You've discussed that in other documentaries, and a power of attorney for financial matters. But when those health expenses start to go up, that's when the hardworking, hard-saving middle class needs to know that you don't have to be utterly impoverished to access some of the benefits that are out there. For example, veterans benefits. 1/3 of our seniors are either veterans or the surviving spouses of veterans. There are aid and attendance benefits for people whose medical expenses exceed 5% of their income. There are asset thresholds and other types of qualifications, but you might, in fact, be entitled to get $2,000 a month tax-free. It's worth looking into. Similarly, Medicaid will not require, particularly a couple, to be utterly impoverished before they're eligible for benefits. So one of my...
And that is very commonly assumed.
It is assumed. Okay. And people will call me and say, I've spent all of my mother's money and now I thought it would be time to call a lawyer, and I don't know what to say. And another thing, I think one reason I got into working with this population is people will think that the way to qualify is to give all of their assets away to their children, which can be a terrible plan. Not a necessary plan, because, for example, your house is an exempt asset for both veterans benefits and Medicaid, but it can also have some really dire consequences if your children have a bad divorce or one of them takes bankruptcy, or there are some... Don't think you know what the plan is. Get some information, and maybe one of the best ways is to pay for just a consultation with a lawyer.
Well, and how much of this may be that people sort of know, but maybe they've always been independent and they're proud? I mean, I see you nodding, Maribeth. I mean, it's hard if you've never accepted any kind of assistance or entitlement, maybe, to say, maybe I should look into choices or TennCare choices or what. Go ahead.
Absolutely. It's everyone has, as Barbara said, worked hard. They think they have enough money. They've never had to ask for help. And Barbara mentioned some of the big programs that can help, but there are a lot of little programs. Nashville, as well as many communities, have relief on property taxes. That can make a huge difference for seniors.
And explain that. I remember hearing something about it, which I didn't know, and a lot of people may not know. Just can you briefly say what that is?
Yeah, I don't have the details, but you can call our government offices and find out more. But basically, it's to prevent seniors from living in a gentrified neighborhood and not being able to pay their taxes. They bought the house for $30,000 many years ago. Now the houses around them are selling for $500,000. The property taxes go up, but this helps them be able to afford the taxes and stay in their home. And that can make a huge difference, number one, because it's a big lump sum that needs to come. But there are other programs. There's Meals on Wheels that can be of assistance to somebody that can't get out and to have a healthy meal. There are government agencies that can help explain some Medicare options. They can explain the programs that help pay for the copay or for the deductible. These maybe are the way to kind of break into asking for help. They're not huge things.
And you're not taking a handout. If you own your home and you're getting a little bit of support with paying the taxes, that's not the same thing.
You've been paying taxes a long time. You earned this. You helped other people when you were paying full taxes. So
It sounds like there's
a
more
variety of
available than people are utilizing. Is that what you're finding?
Exactly. And as Barbara was talking about, the veterans is a big area. Particularly, spouses don't think that they are entitled to any kind of benefits, but many seniors don't. The final thing I would say that kind of lends itself to this point is that when it reaches the point that perhaps the parents are not able to make decisions and it's the adult children that are trying to help their parents, they know even less than the parents.
Yes.
Because they've never had to face this, and none of their friends are facing this. So they really don't have a clue. They're the typical ones that think that Medicare pays for assisted living in nursing homes. So that's another important consideration, and it's important that adult children start thinking about this.
Yes, because many of us are going to be involved with the
Exactly.
care of an elderly relative. We just have a few more minutes, and I think that each of you has really clear ideas about things that could be done differently in our community and by individuals. And I just want to get a thought from you, and maybe we'll start with you, Kay. What would you like to see change in our community? It could be policy or just action that will have a positive impact on the economics of aging for all of us.
I would encourage more education among the elderly on resources available, and where it becomes encouraged, and in neighborhoods where there's just programs that people can get together, have coffee, learn about, being honest about resources available in our community.
And feeling okay about taking advantage of them. Okay. What about you, Barbara?
Well, I would have said education.
Well, I think we all can agree on that one.
But, you know, I'm not a policymaker, but we need to incentivize more savings. And I think we're going to have to face up with the fact that we may have to come up with some more money as a society to take care of, unless we can get a better handle on these rising health care costs, we may have to come up with some more money if we don't want to go back to the day when people are eating cat food in order to survive.
And some have talked about maybe a program for long-term care expenses and that sort of thing that's similar to Medicare, where you can start contributing to at a younger age. That kind of thing is what you're saying. We might need to visit some of those policies as well. Okay. What about you, Maribeth?
I'll take a little different tack on the education, and I think employers need education. And I think they need education on older workers in the workforce, and I think they need education on how they can help their employees as they retire, and I think they need education to help their workers who are caring for a spouse or for a parent on caregiving, how it can be a win-win for employers and for the families if they provide some support there.
How do you engage employers? Is that starting to happen? Because many workers are intimidated by trying to engage employers around these issues.
They don't want to look like they're asking for special help. It's very difficult, and it's been especially difficult when employers are overwhelmed with trying to enforce new health care for the policies for their employees, as well as coming out of the recession. What we've seen is that if the HR manager has had to care for his parents, he gets it. If he hadn't, he doesn't see how much of an issue that is. But it's a slow process, but as more and more people are facing this situation, I think they'll come around.
Well, there's certainly nothing like firsthand experience,
That's right.
but we appreciate you all taking the time to help people sort of learn before they get into a predicament or crises, a little bit more about the economics of aging. So thank you for being with us, and thank you for tuning in to our discussion on the economics of aging. If you would like more information on this and future programs about aging in our community, go to wnpt.org/Aging Matters. Thank you for watching.
Major funding for NPT Reports Aging Matters is provided by Cigna HealthSpring, lead sponsor of NPT Reports Aging Matters. Cigna HealthSpring, helping customers get more from Medicare and more from life. The West End Home Foundation, support in the care of seniors through many organizations in Middle Tennessee. The HCA Foundation, on behalf of TriStar Health. The Jeanette Travis Foundation, dedicated to improving the health and well-being of the Middle Tennessee community, and by members of NPT. Thank you.